Hi, everybody. I'm Gareth here, uh, accompanied by my lockdown hairstyle. Haven't been able to get a haircut for 4 months. A mild inconvenience compared with what so many people have suffered and experienced through the pandemic. Thank you for watching this book launch for my new book, How Not to Be Afraid. When we did the launch in early April, we began with me reading a blessing from the book, but the recording didn't start until about halfway through the blessing. So we decided what we do is I'd record the blessing again so that you could hear it from the start, and then we'll edit that in with the rest of the launch. One other note, there's a couple of seconds later in our program where we're going to beep out some sounds, and that's because we had some uninvited guests in the form of Zoom bombers who wanted to interrupt. And we thought, we could edit that more smoothly and just have me read the piece again that I was reading at the time. But we decided against it because I think one of the experiences I had in launching this book and in reading a section from the book and then being interrupted by people who just wanted to, they were playing a prank and wanted to disrupt things. The experience I had of feeling supported by the people watching the launch, typing messages into the chat saying that they had my back, and of my colleague who was running the tech on the call coming in and saying that he had my back, helped engender more of a spirit of community among those of us who were there. Perhaps even the Zoom bombers who'd be welcome to, as long as they keep their microphones muted. So at any rate, thank you again for being here. This is a blessing from my book, How Not to Be Afraid. And I hope this blessing and the rest of the launch event will offer you some shelter, and you might want to decide to pick up the book. It's available wherever books are sold. And if you want to learn more about it, you can go to hownottobeafraid.com. This is a blessing for the next step. It's no wonder you want to be a peacemaker, for you have seen so much conflict. It's no wonder you want to heal shame, for you have been a home for humiliation. It's no wonder that you have sat in the ashes of loneliness, for you have been scapegoated to the point of wanting to die. It's no wonder that you want to transform supremacist stories, scapegoating stories, selfish stories, separation stories, for you know the weight of what happens when humans do not do their inner work. So, may you go to places of most delighted knowing with friends and deepest intimacy with lovers, and through the dangerous, exhilarating woods of activism with comrades. May you emerge into spacious places, finding reassurance that you did not deserve to be burdened by other people's shadows. May you discover that poisonous shame is built on a lie, and your loneliness is not the end. May you find the path to honest amends for your mistakes and repair for the hurt you have known. As the pain is healed and the gifts come into bloom, may they dance with each other. May the fruit of kindness and solidarity be full on your lips. And may you discover and carefully hold a vision of what you're here for. Brilliantly creative, courage when you need it, with all the community you need, woven into the fabric of this moment's crisis and this moment's gift. A sovereign, a lover, a magician, a warrior protector for the common good. May your wound transform first into a scar, and then a medicine story. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to all of you joining us from across the continent and across the pond to the official US-Canada launch of our beautiful friend Gareth Higgins' newest book, How Not to Be Afraid, 7 Ways to Live When Everything Else Seems Terrifying, or what some of us have been calling Tuesday. I'm Trent Jones.
I'm Francie Calfo. We're excited and honored to support this event along with our dear friend Jennifer Casper and her new beautiful independent bookstore, Village Well Books and Coffee in Culver City, California, by the way. If you live in the LA area, we encourage you to check out this wonderful place of community. Thank you, Jen, for your support of Gareth's book, which all of you can order from Village Well online or at the independent bookstore wherever you are.
Francie and I have known Gareth for many years. We've each gone on a retreat with him in his native Northern Ireland and hosted several events with him here at our home in Santa Monica. As a writer, and for Francie who works with writers, Gareth's message regarding the stories we tell, particularly the power of the stories we tell ourselves, has had a profound impact on us, our work, and our personal lives.
We love Gareth and the message he has for the world. We're excited for you to share in it. To get things started, we're going to pass it over to singer-songwriter David LaMotte in lovely Asheville, North Carolina.
Hey friends, so good to see y'all. What a pleasure and a privilege to be with you and to celebrate this beautiful birthing. I've got a song to play for you that's a song I wrote a little bit after the pandemic began. And you will find if you know Gareth well and you know his writing well, then you might recognize that I paraphrased him within this song. The song's called Here For You. Looking out my Monday window with so few cars driving by, the main street of this river town is strangely still and quiet. The days flow by so slowly with no rhythm to the song, trying to dodge the boulders as the river rolls along. Back in March there was a meeting at the VFW. They said we're all in the same boat, but it really isn't true. Some boats have big motors, some have wooden oars. Some folks are in the water, trying to swim back to the shore. Our lives hang by a thread, but you weave those threads together, they will make a rope that's strong enough to hold on to each other. If we all will pull a little, then just maybe we'll pull through. As long as I am here, we'll be here for you. There are many who need comfort, there are many mouths to feed. So bring what you can offer and ask for what you need. Let's be gentle with each other, we won't always get it right. You don't have to be a hero, just lean a little toward the light. Cause our lives hang by a thread, but you weave those threads together, they will make a rope that's strong enough to hold on to each other. If we all will pull a little, then just maybe we'll pull through. As long as I am here, we'll be here for you. You don't have to say you're okay, let's just stick to what is true. You don't have to smile and fake it, God knows I'm struggling too. Our lives hang by a thread, but you weave those threads together, they will make a rope that's strong enough to hold on to each other. If we all will pull a little, then just maybe we'll pull through. As long as I am here, I said as long as I am here, I will be here for you. Well, I'm so honored to be associated in any small way with this beautiful, generous book that Gareth has offered the world. This is not a book about avoiding conflict. It's not a book about avoiding hard things. It's not a book about pretending that we're not afraid or that there's nothing serious to be afraid of. It's about accessing that part of ourselves that is courageous. And Gareth knows something about that. I'm honored to call him a close friend. And so I know a little bit about his life, and I'm learning even more about it by reading this generous book. I hope that you'll check it out and be blessed by this good offering. I'm also invited to, what am I trying to say? Invited to introduce, not introduced to invite. Invited to introduce the next couple folks who are going to speak, and that's an honor too. I'm just all kinds of honored today. Because next up is Kathleen Norris, who's an extraordinary writer, splitting her time between South Dakota and Hawaii, where she is today. She wrote the fascinating book and beautiful book, A Cloister Walk. And my favorite book of hers is her Vocabulary of Faith, which has introduced me to new ways to look at old words, some of which have become rather toxic in my own history. She's redeemed some words that I needed to have back, and I'm deeply grateful for that. Also, my friend Mickey Scott Bay Jones is here with us. She is known as the Justice Doula. She is a space holder, a wise woman, a courageous guide, a truth teller. Many people who I have seen meet Mickey for the first time find that they're already familiar with her extraordinary poem, An Invitation to Brave Space, which has launched many a holy space for hard conversations. So let me hand it off to you, Kathleen, and let's move forward under the good guidance of these wise women.
Okay, well, thank you for your generous introduction. You used that word to describe the book, and it's true, but I was honored to hear you talk about how one of my books has affected you and helped you redefine some toxic words. And I, having published a lot of books and gotten a lot of different response from readers, I think Gareth is in for a treat, a surprise, a terror. In many ways, because I have the feeling that this book is going to trigger a lot of emotions in a lot of people, and they are going to want to respond to tell him what telling his story has done for them. It's one of the great rewards of being a writer. You can't predict it, you can't expect it, you can't even plan for it, but it just happens. And I was very honored when Gareth asked me to write the foreword for this book, and so I want to read it to you. And it also, thinking about the last time I saw Gareth and Dave, was the last time I traveled before the pandemic. When I left Asheville after the Wonderful Movies and Meaning conference, it was the end of February, and within a couple of weeks, everything had shut down. So your song reminded me of that as well. Well, here's the foreword to this generous and I would say hospitable book. Your enjoyment of the world is never right till every morning you awake in heaven. Not many of us can match the abandon of the 17th century British poet Thomas Traherne, but he lets us know we have an option to embrace gratitude so fully that it eclipses our anxieties and fears. Lest we dismiss Traherne as naive or foolish, consider that his was a remarkably unstable era, a violent civil war and the execution of King Charles, followed by the brutal dictatorship of Oliver Cromwell. I should make an aside here. My husband's parents were all born in Ireland, and his grandmother used to use the word Cromwell as a curse. Social unrest eased when Traherne was 24 and newly ordained as an Anglican priest, but 5 years later, the bubonic plague struck London, killing thousands and shutting down all trade and social life. Imagine the terror of not knowing what had caused the disease, what might cure it, or how long it would last. And yet we find Thomas Traherne waking every morning in heaven. His religious faith no doubt helped him, but the kind of gratitude he exudes does not require it. It does require a realistic assessment of our fears. And now we have a book to help with that. How Not to Be Afraid, a wholehearted blend of memoir and practical suggestions for coping with fear. It is a necessary book at a time when so many have so much to fear and when fear is being manipulated for political gains. Gareth Higgins examines the full range of human anxieties, from personal feelings of shame and exclusion to concerns about social upheaval. He firmly rejects the notion that violence is needed to conquer fear and restore order. I became a friend of Gareth when he invited me to one of the annual retreats he leads in Northern Ireland. There I learned more about the terrors he experienced growing up during the Troubles. But I also learned about the peacemaking efforts that he and many others are engaged in there in the hope of transforming their society for the better. I confess that I don't like self-help books. They typically offer a false sense of security, suggesting that we can control our lives with cheerful thoughts and a list of do's and don'ts. This book is an altogether different animal. It's a gentle, open invitation, full of hospitable storytelling that allows us to find ourselves in its pages. As we read about how Gareth has faced terror in his life, we are challenged to reflect on our own fears and to imagine a way to a better self and a better story. God knows we need it. We may be hardwired to fear genuine danger, but all too often we let it imprison us until, as Gareth points out, it becomes self-defeating. I once witnessed a dear friend pacing, wringing her hands and grinding her teeth, fretting about her daughter who was driving home for Thanksgiving from a college some 200 miles away. When at last the girl entered the house, there were hugs and tears and laughter, but within minutes, my friend was grinding her teeth again and wringing her hands. "What's wrong?" I asked, and she replied, "Now I have to worry about how to get her back safely." Our fears can be a spiritual short circuit, as they were for my friend, preventing us from being fully present, even to those we love. But Gareth knows there is another way, and he provides valuable insight into the difference between debilitating fear and a holy fear that can give us courage. Naming and facing our fears can open us to acts of great compassion. I think of the Cistercian women who have chosen to remain in Venezuela despite the worsening chaos and violence there, taking a stand for kindness in the face of cruelty and adversity. They share with their neighbors in ever increasing deprivation, and they do what they can for the people who come to them, seeking food, clothing, shoes, and medicine. A recent photograph shows the women smiling broadly. They are living the story they were called to live, cultivating peace in difficult circumstances. If they encountered Gareth's claim that the authority to tell a story may be more powerful than the ability to launch missiles, I imagine they would laugh and say, "Well, of course." To choose not to fear in the face of danger can make us not only grateful, but boldly prophetic, which brings me back to Thomas Traherne. And this is a quote: "You never enjoy the world aright till the sea itself floweth in your veins, till you are clothed with the heavens and crowned with the stars." What Thomas Traherne could only imagine, we now know to be true. Human blood has the same chemical composition is seawater, and every atom in our bodies was once inside a star. Thanks to the Hubble telescope, we are the first people able to see our home in full, a mostly blue and beautiful orb in the dark of space. There is in our fears a better story. Let this book help you find it. That was an honor for me to be able to write this. I really don't cover a whole lot about what's in the book, but I think my little introduction shows what happens. You start telling your own stories once you read it. I'm telling a story about Cistercian nuns in Venezuela and a friend of mine who was a champion warrior all the time. So I'm hoping that the people who read this book, and I'll hold up the cover for everyone to see it, will discover the stories that they need to tell about their own fears. So thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. It's always a joy to hear you read and to hear your words. My name is Mickey Scott Bay Jones, and I am the Justice Doula. And I am a friend of Gareth Higgins, and just so delighted to be able to call myself a friend of Gareth's. I don't think he needs much introduction, because you all are all here because you know something about Gareth. And you'll learn a lot more about him through this book. But I just wanted to introduce him by saying, I have this little saying that I've written on a chalkboard in the entryway to my home. And it says, practice makes possible. And what I know about Gareth is that he actually practices the things that he writes about. And today there are so many people who will study something for a little while, and then they'll write a whole book about it, right? They may live away for a short period of time and then write about it. But Gareth, the things that are in this book, he has practiced. And so that has opened up new possibilities for his life. And then he has shared those things with us so that we might open more possibilities in our lives. So Gareth is going to read a little bit from the book, and then Gareth and I are going to talk for a little bit, and then we'll open the circle wider again, as Gareth does, and we will have a time of conversation with those of you who have questions or want to talk about some of the themes in this book. So, Gareth?
Thank you, Mickey. So I'm going to read just a little bit from the start of the book. There's an edgy but delicate movie called Heist, about the kind of thieves who distinguish themselves by rhetorical eloquence and wry one-liners. In response to the assertion that he's a pretty smart fella, the master burglar, played by Gene Hackman, offers the following. I'm not that smart. I tried to imagine a fella smarter than myself. Then I tried to think, what would he do? Rogues are often capable of ageless insight. Before you can become wise, you need to admit that you're not. There are 3 typical responses to fear: fight, flee, or freeze. These 3 responses are really stories we tell ourselves about what to do with fear. When we are afraid, we repeat stories we have learned that say we must either lash out, run away, or be immobilized. Sometimes, because of the stories we tell in our fear, we hurt others. We lash out at family members, or we start wars. Sometimes, in our fear, we try to escape from the voices in our heads, and we leave unfinished the work we are here to do and the gifts we are here to share. Sometimes in our fear, we go numb, stay stuck, and do nothing. We miss life, and the people we could share it with miss us. Fighting back against fear tends to provoke a rebound of even more aggressive, fearful reaction. Running away from it diminishes our lives. Freezing changes nothing. These three stories we tell in response to fear are totally natural. And while they may carry us through immediate danger, they don't help us grow. I have spent most of my life overwhelmed by fear. The three stories dominated my thoughts and actions: fight, flee, freeze, and repeat. They took me to the edge. Terrors colonized my imagination. I became desperate. I'm not that smart. So, like Gene Hackman's character, I tried to imagine what someone smarter than me would do. Over time, I discovered a bit of wisdom that changed everything. There is a fourth story. This book is called How Not to Be Afraid, but it's not about eliminating fear. It's about learning how to feel fear without being driven by it. It's about knowing the difference between healthy fear and paranoia. It's about becoming tender enough with ourselves and connecting enough with our true selves to find the gift underneath the fear. Fear doesn't go away, nor should it. At times, it helps us make wise decisions. Put on your seatbelt. Don't put your hand in that tiger's cage. Slow down. And at times, our fear is about loss, the sickness or death of a loved one, for instance, and it must be held with great tenderness. The problem is when fear becomes the lens through which we see everything. We're often afraid of the wrong things, or we fear the right things the wrong way. Then we find it difficult or impossible to tell the difference between the story in our head and what we're actually facing. The first thing you notice when you experience fear as much as I have is that you don't want to. It's unpleasant. It gets in the way. It often feels like a waste of time, and at the same time, it feels impossible to do anything about it. A wise friend once told me that 90% of our fears do not reflect reality at all. I have spent years searching for the peer-reviewed psychology journal article in which that statistic is published. I haven't found it yet, but it has more than a ring of truth. How many times have I faced something that seemed terrifying, but then wasn't as bad as I had feared? And even more often, the thing I was afraid of simply didn't happen at all. Fear and danger are not the same thing. We tend to overstate the presence of danger, imagining peril where there is none, and we often underappreciate what we can do about the threats that actually exist. If we don't learn what to do with fear, we may miss the beauty of each ordinary day lived in community in service to the common good, in gratitude for the astonishing gift of simply being alive. There's an old idea that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. I'm going to risk suggesting that this idea has been fundamentally misunderstood. It does not mean that there's a scary bearded guy in the sky who loves you so much that he will kill you if you don't agree with him. It means that becoming wise begins with honoring reality. There is a healthy way to be afraid that helps us live better, and an unhealthy one that makes us sick. There is a well-worn but sometimes hidden path that can help us discern the difference. Traveling along this path won't show us how not to fear at all, but it can help us figure out how to be and how not to be afraid. The path is not difficult. In fact, in some respects, it's much easier than the alternative of being overwhelmed by fear. What might be difficult is trusting that there is a different way of being and then practicing it. We're going to explore some aspects of this path in the coming pages. But before we do that, I want to welcome you properly. I imagine you're here because you know fear well, either in yourself or in a loved one. You're looking for some comfort, some connection, some ideas that might help. Thank you for coming. I'm glad we're here together. As I write, I'm thinking about you with tenderness and respect. I'm wondering about the journey that has brought you here. What keeps you awake or goes bump in your night? I'm imagining that you may have despaired of ever being free of the terror you experience, or the shame you feel, or the sense that you're a burden to others. You are not alone, and you are so welcome here. It's my job to show you that what I just said is true. Fear is a natural response to the world as we see it. At times, it is an inevitable biological reaction. At times, it is All right, we got somebody who's decided to join us. Thank you for muting whoever that was. I'm not afraid of Zoom bombers. At times, it is an inevitable biological reaction. At times, it's necessary to keep us safe. I'd be more worried about you if you never felt fear. Okay, we're gonna have to do something at the moment to ensure that Vince is going to be working on that. If everybody wants to just turn your sound off for a moment, and we'll wave at you whenever we've handled this.
We're good to go, Gareth.
We're good? Okay. Thank you. Hold on just one second. One of the things, I'll come back to the reading in just a second. One of the things that the book talks about is how everybody yearns for the good old days, and but when you go back to the good old days, you find I want to live in Paris in the 1920s, but in Paris in the 1920s, people wanted to live in Paris in the 1890s, and I certainly want to live at a moment when people can't interrupt a book launch and decide and try to throw people off course. Because in the 1890s, they didn't have Zoom and people couldn't interrupt book launches that way. But I guarantee you, people's book launches still got interrupted by people who were dedicated to revealing their shortcomings. And I hope whoever that was can read the book and benefit from it. And if you're still here, you're welcome to read the book and benefit from it and not say anything else the rest of the time that we're here. All right, where were we? An inevitable biological reaction. At times, it's necessary to keep us safe. I'd be more worried about you if you never felt fear. But our fears are also reactions to the story we believe. The authority to tell a story may be more than the ability to launch. And these days of So bad things come in threes. I'm expecting it to happen at least one more time, and we're going to keep plowing through.
Good, Gareth. We got your back.
Thanks, Vince.
Got your back.
The authority to tell a story may be more powerful than the ability to launch missiles. And these days, we live in a world of overactive competition to tell the story. Old certainties, some healthy, some not, are under serious question. New platforms, opportunities, and invitations for telling stories are emerging. Never before have we had more public storytelling and fewer agreed upon gatekeepers to help us decide, isn't that the truth? To help us decide what is wise, what is factual, what is a matter of opinion or taste, and what is pure propaganda or conspiracy. While it is sometimes obvious, it's not always easy to discern whether the storytellers we're listening to are nurturing the common good or merely their own egos, bank balances, or dominance. We live in a time when so much seems uncertain. The stability of the climate the relationships within and between nations, confidence about public health and economic security, the possibility of overcoming racism with beloved community, whether or not we will ever again feel safe from violence, authoritarianism, or pandemics. Things that previous generations seemed to take for granted now seem entirely in question. But even the people who lived in the good old days yearned for the good old days. Every generation makes up a story about a happier past and wishes for a better future. Unless we learn wisdom, the present rarely makes sense until it's over. So even though we might see the past through rose-colored glasses, it's no wonder so many of us feel anxious. It's difficult to sort through the noise to find reliable sources of comfort. If trauma is what happens when a profound wound is not met with adequate empathy, it's no wonder so many of us in this moment feel traumatized. The ground has shifted beneath our feet, and few of the structures and voices we relied on have proven able to reassure us. A few years ago, having reached the point of apparent helplessness in the face of obsessive fear about violence, homophobia, my place in the world, and my fantasy of God's judgment of me, I took a clinical questionnaire to self-assess for the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. The questionnaire ended with the assertion that a yes response to more than 2 questions might indicate the presence of PTSD. Out of 40 questions, I had answered yes to 38. Aside from this being one of the few times I ever got better than a B on a test, I felt relieved. I was not crazy after all. Having lived with the symptoms of PTSD for decades, I was soon properly diagnosed and found that the attention of a good therapist trained in tending to such woundedness can radically transform one's experience of the world. Dave, the therapist, told me that he didn't like the word disorder. He preferred to call it post-traumatic stuff, because there's nothing disordered about reacting fearfully to abnormal circumstances. Such reactions are totally normal. It's the circumstances that are disordered. We'll get to more of this later in the book, but in this moment, if you're experiencing things that seem like the symptoms of post-traumatic stuff or other anxiety stuff, or just feeling a little nervous about continuing, I want to let you know we're not going to talk about the gory details of violence and the things that make us afraid here tonight. We're here to explore the possibility of transforming those things. This book is not a replacement for therapy or medication thoughtfully prescribed, but I hope that reading it alongside good therapy will help. Writing it that way has certainly helped me. It's also worth noting that the root words for what we understand today as therapy carried the sense of caring for the gods. Part of the therapy we may all need and are all called to offer is to tend to the voices within and help them find their rightful place in the drama and comedy of life. The stories we tell are, in a certain sense, gods. How we receive and work with or challenge them will help determine their power over us. It may be the gods at the present moment who need more help than we do. Perhaps the voices inside you, the terrifying stories that interrupt and threaten to capsize you, are themselves gods asking for your help, or maybe just your attention. Just as it can be difficult to tell the difference between depression and discernment, one of the first tasks we face in fear is to decide what truth the fear is trying to tell us about our cosmic selves and our small world. Then we can decide what to do with it. With that in mind, this book won't teach you how not to feel fear, but it might help you find better ways to work with fear. It could perhaps just as easily be titled, How to Be Afraid Well. It's intended to help you feel less alone and show you some steps you can take to transform your fears into better stories about who you truly are. And I'm willing to bet that who you truly are is much more valuable than you think. I think, Vince, you may need to unmute me. Yeah, there we go.
I couldn't unmute, so, which is great. Fix that, okay? Done, been fixed. So I thank you, first of all, for reading that. And there were parts that were starting to come back to me because it's been a while since I've read through the book. I don't often, well, I do read books over, but not usually cover to cover. Like I have little pieces that I'll read over, but I want to read this again. And I think I told you that immediately after reading it. I was like, I read it, which, sometimes when you get a book to like write a little thing for, you don't quite read every word. But I actually read the whole thing, but I was like, and I'm about to read it again. Like I cannot wait. But I want to read what I said about your book, what I sent to you, that so that everyone would see what I thought about your book. And then I have a question for you. So what I had to say after reading How Not to Be Afraid, I have my copy right here. I said, in How Not to Be Afraid, Gareth Higgins doesn't dismiss the very real fear we feel, but instead invites us into stories and practices that offer us ways to process our feelings and experiences and bravely cultivate substantial generative love. This book is a much needed resource for skill building through our fear and trauma so that we might create the belonging and communities we desire. And I recently heard someone, another author, talking about when they wrote their book, it had so much felt like it was theirs and they wanted to say these important things. But when the book was finally released, that they actually burned a copy of it as a way to kind of release this book out into the world. And they realized that people would understand this book in different ways. And I think even the way what resonated with me and what I got out of it is going to be different than what somebody else did. So, there's a lot of people on this call, 100 people, but what came out for you as you were writing it? And even as you've reread your words, what is this book about for you?
The way you frame that question, it's never been asked that way to me before. So first of all, I'd like to say if every town in the United States could have a book burning of my book, that would certainly get it some attention, but I'm not sure that it would be motivated the way you speak. Let's not go down that road.
Well, increase sales, got to buy more.
Yeah. So I think actually I'm having a very weird experience with it because since it arrived in hard copy form, and I've been working with the ideas in it for at least a decade, I've started reading it again. And my editors on this call at the moment, and Valerie Weaver-Zurcher from Broadleaf Books, who kind of, the experience I had of being edited was my editor helped me discover what the book was about. And reading it now with some distance, I'm experiencing, there were some ideas that were like in the heart, but they hadn't been articulated in words. And there were some words that hadn't kind of permeated my heart yet. What had led me to want to write a book about fear in the first place was I grew up with a lot of fear. I was living in a society that was known for having a violent civil conflict, and the violence had affected my own family. And I was also growing up as a person confused and asking questions about my sexuality in a very homophobic culture, and in certainly a non-affirming religious culture that had the effect, on the one hand, I felt afraid of these external threats to do with violence and political division and saying what I really felt. And on the other hand, I had these fears of what was inside me, and because I basically had carried this story that there was something wrong with me, because that I was sinful or toxic or mentally ill or even demon possessed. So looking back on it now, I see it was this perfect storm. I had these internal self-rejections and this external sense of suspicion. But in later life, as some of this stuff started to kind of resolve itself through therapy, through moving into other cultures that were perhaps a little healthier, through being around people committed to peace building, coming out, being partnered by a person who's fiercely continuing to claim his own healing from some of those inner voices, and particularly finding a spiritual community that said you don't have to choose between who God has made you to be and participating in this religious community. In fact, it's the message that said there was something wrong with you. That's the thing that's wrong, right?
Yeah.
That I then discovered writing by two people who couldn't be as far away from each other theoretically, but I actually would love to see the two of them get to know each other. And that is a social psychologist who has written about perspective on history and the current moment, and basically not confusing headlines with trend lines. Our brains are hardwired to predict probability based on how easily we can remember an example of something. And so we've all seen on the news media, lots of horrible things happen. And so we already over predict how often horrible things happen. And perspective on history shows that basically, like I said, everybody in the good old days yearned for the good old days. People in the future will yearn for these as being the good old days. Since the pandemic started, I received I saw a lot of articles and received a lot of fundraising letters from nonprofits that would say now more than ever. And I understand why people would say that, but I actually think that's a category error, or it's like a statistically inaccurate thing to say, because there are a lot of incredibly positive things that have happened. Because they have happened and we're not fighting about those things anymore, the space exists for us to care about the thing we're noticing now. And because of the internet, more people care about more people. And more different kinds of people care about more different kinds of people, particularly people who've been on top of the social hierarchy are starting to care about people who've been historically excluded, who never needed reminders of these terrible things that happened. What's happening now is that people who had the privilege to ignore it now can't ignore it. And some of us don't want to ignore it. And some of us are trying to live amends for how much we ignored it before. And perhaps better still, some of us are realizing we're all somewhere between privilege and lack. All of us have some resources that we're called to use for the common good. And all of us have some lack where we need help. The other writers, so I had these social psychologists who were touching me, the other writers and teachers were kind of spiritual teachers, Buddhist teachers, Christian teachers, contemplative teachers, who helped me learn that there have been for thousands of years people who have faced the most terrifying circumstances. And I was going to say, and yet, but it's not despite of. I think it's actually partly because of those circumstances. Through necessity, they have developed practices that will help create a buffer between them and the thing that's happening. And that's why I say fear and danger, or fear and risk, are not the same thing. And learning to sort of heal your unnecessary fear and become a more peaceful person doesn't mean that bad things aren't going to happen to you. I think it can mean that those bad things won't affect you as much as they would affect someone who hadn't been introduced to these practices. So that's the two parts to the journey. One is all this fear was there in early life, and then it started to blend with other voices. And now it's a blend. The fear is a lot of it's still there, but the other voices are there. And then these practices, which I talk about in the book, are becoming more and more second nature in my life. And the more I do them, the more I slow down my breathing, the more I participate in circles with other people on the same path, the more I'm able to face the truly fearful and also figure out what's a result of my own trauma, and best of all, how am I going to live and what am I going to do about it?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I have a really practical question. I was just thinking about the feeling of fear in our bodies, you know, the feeling that something isn't right, or even like something not sitting right with your spirit, right? And I think we also have all these feelings that we kind of label in different ways. And I wanted to know, when was the last time you felt fear? and what did you do?
About 10 minutes ago, when our friends came in with their Zoom bomb, and I don't know if everybody heard it, but there were at least a couple of people who were trying to interrupt the book launch, as has become just one of the things you got to deal with these days. So I felt fear, but it was the fear of not knowing what was going on initially, and I tried to keep going. So actually, I think that's a manifestation of feel the fear and do it anyway. And then I tried to make a joke about it, which is a way of trying to discharge the energy. And I'm not sure that the joke fully articulated the warmth I actually wanted to show to these people. Who, anybody who's from Belfast in this call knows the word Egypt. And an Egypt is someone who does things like Zoom bombing a book launch, but they're also, we're not going to hurt them because they did that. We're just going to make sure we mute them for the next while and invite them to reflect on their actions. So that was the last time I felt fear. If you want me to speak to a bigger question of fear, I've often recently, when I see people behaving aggressively in the media or in politics, it's partly fear, but that's not even, it's not the surface. The surface feeling is just exhaustion and sadness, and this feeling of, oh man, come on, would you not just give us a break? And then if I get a little bit more enlightened about it, I'll go to, all right, what's the legitimate need that this person is trying to meet through this illegitimate way? You know, there's, as you know, I think there's great wisdom in the notion that there's no such thing as an illegitimate need. There's just more or less legitimate ways of getting your needs met. And I think about, what role can I play in helping here? And it's interesting to me that this fear I felt, particularly about aggressive men in public life, you know, that there's that feeling that through writing the book and through looking at that fear for a while, the beginnings of an answer have started to come to me. Is it okay if I name that? I don't want to go too far beyond your initial question. Well, it's really that there's this hero archetype, and it shows up in lots of cultures, but you know, the US American Westerny version of it for a long time there was Rambo, you know, guy with the massive muscles and huge artillery who mows down everybody in his path in order to protect some villagers, right? Who are in trouble. Now, and I really don't like that hero archetype. Somebody close to me who kind of has the physical fitness of Rambo and has been on a journey in his life said something to me a couple of weeks ago that has changed the way I think about the hero archetype and changed the way I think about my fear. And I think this could be helpful probably to everybody on this call, even the Zoom bombers. And that is, a hero is someone who creates safety for others. A deeper form of heroism is the act of creating safety for others, even others that you don't like. A deeper form than that is the act of creating safety for others, even others that you don't like, while minimizing harm to anybody else. And perhaps the deepest form of heroism is to create safety for others, even others you don't like, while minimizing harm to anyone else and ensuring people are safe from you or from me, and maintaining a radical commitment to fierce self-love. One of the paradoxes of the way we talk about love, and I think, love is extending yourself for the purpose of the benefit of another. That's a paraphrase of M. Scott Peck's definition. Love is extending yourself for the benefit of another. One of the paradoxes about the way we talk about love is we shy away from the self-love thing, right? It sort of feels like that's the last thing on the agenda, should be the self-love part. And then we don't really talk about what it means to love yourself. And it's kind of icky, or it's sort of seen as prideful, or you got a big ego. The irony is, if you're wanting to protect these vulnerable people, one of the things you're incarnating to them is that you believe they are worthy of being loved, which is why you are risking yourself to care for them. But if you don't love yourself, why would you expect them to believe you when you say they're worthy of love? That's right. Actually, it's in the interests of the people you're trying to protect for you to not try to do more than you are able to do, for a start. And even better, to, as John O'Donoghue would say, he would walk into a room and he would say, "I love my life," right? And he would say it loudly. And I think part of it was because it was true. Part of it was because he was wanting to make it more true by saying it. And part of it is that he was wanting to tell other people it can be true for you too. I love my life. To go back to Rambo wants to protect. So he's a third of the way there to being a real hero. Mm-hmm. Those of us who want to protect are also a third of the way there. But if we want to protect while minimizing harm to others, we're 2/3 of the way to being heroic. We're already twice as heroic as Rambo is. But the cultural myth says that people who are tender-hearted, people who are prepared to die rather than to kill, are less heroic than people who want to exert aggression over and defeat other people. And so if you ask me what I want the book to do, I want it to nurture the peaceful warrior. And I don't really even like the word warrior, but the part of us that has confused our own tenderness with weakness and is actually on a journey I think is happening in our culture. It's rising at the moment, that vulnerability in public manifested with healthy boundaries is actually a striking form of strength. And even the Rambos out there may simply be misguided in their tactics. If they truly care about other people, we want to help them with their tactics.
Yeah. Well, I know we are going to be moving into some questions from everybody. If you have a question for Gareth, you can begin to put that in the chat. Try and keep it as succinct and clear as you can, because there are a lot of folks on here and we want to get to some of those.
And I think keeping it in the chat's the best way to do that. Okay. And I welcome if you have another question before you want to
as some of those get in there, I'd like to. There's just a particular thing in that. I was resonating with a lot of what you said, just because as a Black woman, as a Black queer woman, as someone who considers myself a womanist, like our beloved Alice Walker, that has propelled me into that, keeping self-love as I protect others, that both of those need to coexist. And I think what I've seen in this book, and because I know some of these stories, since I've heard you tell them over the years as well, and knowing your life, and knowing our interactions between the two of us, you have really learned to stay in your own story and to not collapse struggles, right? So it's not that it's not about a universal story and collapsing all harm and oppression and pain into one story. And so there's something there that you're getting, right? Even though you know that people will perceive you with a certain amount of with certain privileges and power, even though you have a complicated existence as, when you're in the US as an immigrant, as a queer man, and all these things, right? So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that, like learning to talk from your own story and not kind of collapsing, but also that we all have places where we can kind of wrestle with our fear and with the realities of the struggles that we face, and kind of hold that without making it just flat.
I think the premise to your question is fascinating, and I would love it if you would like make the question really concise so that I can understand the question. Because what I heard was, I'd love you to talk more about that, but I want to do justice to your question. So
yeah, I just mostly think you're already doing that. So I'm wondering how you came to understand that, came to do that.
And that is like
the not flattening stories, right? You're coming from your own story and what you've learned, but you're also saying that this relates to other people's stories, but you don't squish it all together saying, oh, we all have the same fear, we all have to deal with this.
Yes, I think
particularly I think white people tend to do that.
Sure.
And you're not inviting white people into that flattening. You're saying deal with your own story and your own fear, and still respect that there are, that's what I'm getting to.
Sure. So yes, I think that we all have fears, but we don't have the same stories. And the way even if we do have the same kind of plot or narrative to the story, I experience my story differently to you because of the resources that we have in common and not in common, and even the time of day that the thing happened, right? So what I really want to do is to make space for other people's stories to come in. And it's not, wow, Gareth's got this amazing story. My story is no more valuable than everybody else on this call, but it's no less valuable either. Now there are, let's call them acts of respect and decency and overcoming and rebalancing a massively skewed cultural system which allowed only certain voices to speak before. And so I want to be aware of that. But I do truly believe that even the person with the most political power and the most temporal wealth still has some lack that needs to be met. And usually it's a spiritual lack or a lack of community, or things like that. And even the person, the story of the widow's mite in the Christian tradition is usually pointed up as the story about this woman who's got absolutely nothing except this little bit of money, and then she puts it in the collection plate. And that story would be used in my childhood to basically say, so you need to put what you've got in the collection plate, right? Which let's just say, I think that's collapsing or flattening the widow's story, because I think that story is saying something much broader than that, which is even those most despised and marginalized and poor among us have a gift that needs to be honored and listened to. And there's someone out there for whom the widow's mite would have the power of resurrection, would be the very medicine that they need. So don't ever despise anybody's gift. And so when we start to do events in person and retreats around this book, part of it will be about people learning to share their story, but also to move beyond the negativity bias that exists in our culture, where when you ask people how you doing, we usually start with, there's two ways of distorting that. One is a very US American way, which is to say, I'm fantastic and I'm not going to tell you anything real about my life. And the other is a sort of a Northern Irish way, which is to say, oh my God, you won't believe what happened today, right? And whether it was an absolute, one of the worst things that's ever happened, or the bus was late, right? Now, part of it is we need to model and call forth the highest way of thinking about our stories. So in the circles that we've helped facilitate and been part of, we don't ask people, how are you doing? We say, what's life giving to you right now? Just one thing. And then we say, and what's not life-giving? Just one thing. And so that kind of corrects for the pessimists among us being too pessimistic and the optimists being kind of potentially toxically positive. And then the third of 4 questions that we ask is, what do you feel called to do to serve the common good from the place where your wound and your gifts meet? And your wound is not just the bad things that have happened to you. Your wound can actually be the things you empathize with that haven't happened to you. One of the Oscar-nominated live-action shorts this year is a documentary short about the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. Now, I cannot say on any measure that I am suffering what the democracy activists in Hong Kong are suffering, but I was so moved watching that film, and I really had a sense of, these are my brothers and sisters and siblings, and I want to support them in some way, and I felt pain. I'm not saying I felt their pain, but that's another version of wound. So where my wounds and my gifts meet are often the place where I'm called to serve the common good. And the reason I think it's really important to talk about that is because a lot of the mindfulness and contemplative work in the world today is purely self-centered. It's all about how I can kind of feel more calm. And if it doesn't lead to service to the common good, it's broken. And then the last question we ask is, how can we help each other? And we need to model communities where we're willing to go to the full extent of naming our needs, not just, I'm a bit tired, but I can't pay my rent. And not just, here's a cup of tea, but okay, this circle's going to help you pay your rent.
Yeah.
Let's maybe go to some of the questions in the chat.
Well, we're gonna go to Trent and Francie first, I think, and then we're collecting some good questions there in the chat, and we'll get to those after we hear from some of our friends here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So Gareth, I think what I have is first an expression of gratitude, and then a question. So part of your work for me was an acknowledgement of the past, of pain, of, as you expressed it, trauma with a lack of empathy. And so for me, as a result of that retreat in Ireland, as a writer, I said, I'm basically telling my story, ignoring the first 10 chapters. I need to go back and tell the first 10 chapters. So I know the beginning of your story, and I know where it took place, and I know what you experienced, and you talk about some of that in your book. You left, like I did, the place where that happened, and you went to another place. And one of my kind of sustaining fears is the idea of going back and what that might be. You can see where this is going, because I know that you went back just a couple of months ago, and unfortunately, it's not even the place that it was 6 months ago. I know things are happening again, and I'd love to know your thoughts and wisdom on what that journey back for you was as you approached it, and now that you're there, what are you experiencing, and how are you dealing with that?
Thank you. So we're just outside Belfast, and literally 5-minute walk from the house I grew up in. And we came back for a sabbatical. And at the risk of sounding facetious, we have free healthcare again after living in the US. And I cannot tell you what the psychic and emotional relief is for me, returning to this, having left here, gone to the US and been confronted by the system there. And, you know, we're planning to be here for a year and then be back in the US. So that's one thing. There's been a massive sense of decompression around healthcare and public transport that works, and living in a more cohesive society after living through these years of polarization at the national level in the US. And it's just been nice for me to be back in the place that I'm from. And I was afraid to come back, you know, I had some fears, which were around, I think everybody who kind of goes back to a place they've been away from for a long time, it's reasonable or natural for them to fear, what happens if I meet my old friends who I don't like anymore, or who I'm not like anymore? Now, part of the joy is sometimes it turns out that they're not like you either anymore. And they might have become more like who you are now. So I have a friend on Facebook who I had no relationship with in high school other than to feel mildly scared of them. And he friended me a couple of years, and I was a bit, I don't know. And he sends me these poetic affirmations of my work. And here's the thing, he's 46 too. It's possible that I'm not the only person that went to my school who grew up. It's possible that two of us, or maybe more, actually grew up. It's possible that other people are feeling the same thing about me. Oh, I don't want to see Gareth because I didn't like him. So that was the thing that I was nervous about, was kind of getting trapped in those patterns. And weirdly, because it's a fairly strict lockdown here, we've hardly seen anybody. But I've felt nothing but affirmation from the people I've talked to in Zoom and through email and so on. What's more important is that in the last 2 weeks, some unrest has reappeared in some parts of Northern Ireland. That's, if you're being really generous about it, it's because some people feel very aggrieved about the way Brexit has been handled, and about a policing decision regarding the policing of a political funeral last summer. And the way I see it is, it's that we've had a peace agreement for 23 years. Today is the 23rd anniversary of the signing of our peace agreement. We had ceasefires for 4 years leading up to that. And there were talks in the background for 20 years in different ways leading up to that too. So all I want to say about what's happening right now, and I see there's some people in the chat who are asking, first of all, about our safety. We're safe, and the news media is presenting the worst things that are happening right now, but it's not everything that's happening right now. And even regarding those difficult things, there is dialogue happening. There is a desire to resolve this. Hopefully it won't get worse. Hopefully there won't be any further injuries. But to compare this moment with 25 years ago, or to compare this moment with 50 years ago, this is a vastly changed place, because people decided that it was in one community's best interests to ensure that the other community got their needs met too, and vice versa. And peace processes are messy, complicated, imperfect things that certainly in 1994, between 1994 and 1998, there hadn't been a lot of peace processes. There've been a lot more since then. Our peace process was kind of being made up as we went along, with some encouragement from South Africa, with the former Prime Minister of Finland, with a former Canadian general, and with a former US Senator chairing the talks and part of the parallel processes. And now we have 23 years of information about what's happened in the north of Ireland that could be helpful to other people. There are certainly things I think we would have done differently with hindsight, but you don't have hindsight in the moment. And those are particularly to do with the socioeconomic needs of people who'd always been economically disenfranchised, recognizing that you can feel that your flag is flying, but you can still be hungry at night and you can't eat a flag. And the other, which may affect, it's hard to tell whether it affects fewer people, but it's equally important, and that is the needs of the victims and survivors of the violence, both those who have suffered physically, those who've been bereaved, and those who've been traumatized, whose needs have never been comprehensively addressed. It's been a piecemeal approach, and it's because we were making it up as we went along. I would much rather live in a society where we are willing to make it up as we go along, rather than keep trying to do the same thing over and over again that doesn't work. Thanks for your question.
Well, we are obviously getting close to time, not too close yet, but there's never enough time for conversations like these. So wanted to see where you wanted to go next. I think Jennifer has a question, and I know the chat is definitely firing up. So would you like to go to Jennifer next?
Yes, thanks.
Hi, thank you. And sorry, I had to switch to my phone. First of all, thank you so much for including us in this launch. It's so wonderful to be in the store and be part of the launch of this amazing book. And I just love the way that you are able to incorporate immediate fears, sort of, I think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like the fears you have when you're working on the bottom of the pyramid versus the fears you have where I feel like I've been very blessed to be in the last years, wanting to open this bookstore and having it be this dream that I was so afraid to go out and potentially fail or potentially succeed at. I don't know which fear was stronger. But my question is, thank you for all of that and for bringing it together and for connecting it to peacemaking and trying to always be our best selves and be peacemakers in the world. And I really want to reach a lot of people with your book. So my question is, how do you sell your book? How do you proselytize people who aren't in this room already, who aren't the ones who are naturally humble and willing to acknowledge that they experience fear? How do we get more people to be interested in and hear your message? I'm gonna put my mask back on and go back on mute.
Thank you. And I should say, folks, if you want signed copies, Jennifer will sell them to you through Village Well Books and Coffee. There's a link in the event page for this. And thank you for what you're doing, starting an independent bookstore in the midst of all of this. And independent bookstores are clearly coming back. So how do we get the word about the book out there? Well, if we're not going to have a series of positive book burnings in which we burn the book in order to release its energy, which really was a new idea to me. I've written a few books, and they've reached dozens of people over the decades, and I didn't write it to sell lots of books. Primarily, I wrote it to try to help myself, and then it got edited in such a way that I think it's going to help other people. And I have to acknowledge, in terms of my affirmation of public vulnerability, I really don't know the answer to your question. Other than to say one person at a time, one open heart at a time. And everyone on this call, if it means something to you, it really does help if you tell people about it. It really does help if you post reviews of it on Goodreads and Amazon, especially, even if you're not going to buy it from Amazon. I hope you will buy it from independent bookstores, especially from Village Well. If you post reviews on it there, even if you're not going to buy it there, it helps bring attention to it. One hope I do have is that everybody's afraid of something. And I hope that people will approach each other and say, hey, do you remember that time you told me about that thing that had you anxious? I might have a book that would help you. And just encourage people to kind of spread it that way. So thank you for your affirmation of the book. And we should go to some more questions before we move toward closing, Nikki. Maybe more questions from the chat.
Yes, let's do that. All right, we have several. You already noted that people have been asking you about your how you're doing, and you assured us that you're safe. And let's see. People are also asking for film recommendations. Do you have a particular, and some people are giving those in the chat, but kind of a medicine film?
Let me think about that. Let me think about
Okay.
that. And if you happen to be my husband and you are thinking of the film that I'm forgetting right now, please text me the name of the film. All right, I'm gonna give you 4.
Four.
Patterson, which is a film by Jim Jarmusch about a mailman and his spouse in New Jersey, because I think it's really a contemplative film about a person who is learning what really matters, and that at a moment of great fear, he figures out how to handle it, protecting other people while minimizing harm to anybody else. Patterson. Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, in terms of the mystical experience that can be induced or that can accompany your own contemplative journey, if you want to go from the particular to the universal, the sense of there being a big universe out there, and what we're learning from quantum physics at the moment may actually have an incredibly positive effect on our fear. If the universe is a story and we are part of that story, and we're actually observing the story of the universe telling us, and we're telling the universe a story back to it, there's some power there. There's some power there. The live action Oscar nominated shorts, which you can almost certainly stream through your local theater at the moment, 2 films from Palestine, and 2 of the remaining 3 from the US. One about a young man and an older man helping each other late at night on a dark city street in a place where fear is kind of mythically present. And then this other Palestinian film that's actually called The Present. These are the Oscar nominated live action shorts. And the film that I often think of as my favorite film is The Fisher King, with Amanda Plummer and Mercedes Ruehl and Jeff Bridges and Robin Williams, which is about 4 people overcoming their own trauma through individual acts of heroism and realizing that they need each other. And last of all, I'm not sure if I named 4 or not, an Iranian film from 1987 called Where is the Friend's House, which is about a little boy trying to reunite another little boy with his lost notebook after school one day. And it contains a stunning act of heroism, because this little boy is doing this in the face of all the adults around him who believe he's up to no good, and he cannot persuade them that he's acting altruistically because they have this negative view of, you're just trying to get out of doing your homework or whatever. And actually he's doing something utterly selfless, and you'll see yourself in it when you watch it. Both the boy who lost his notebook, the boy who goes to help reunite the notebook, and probably also the adult who has suspended their belief in wonder and maybe needs to recapture it.
Thank you for those recommendations. And I love how they come just right to you right at the moment there. So LV asks, and that's my sweetie, asks, yes, about kind of the concept of being afraid and being brave, right? I talk about brave space all the time. And I'm currently trying to write about this. So it's another reason I'm so proud of you, is I know how hard it is to get your thoughts out in some kind of way on paper and then give it to the world. And like being afraid and some kind of bravery at the same time, in the world. How do those concepts both kind of exist at the same time?
So thank you for the question. I think if this idea of heroism is helpful, I'd invite LV and me and anybody else to kind of meditate on that concept of heroism for a while, because the hero, another thing about the hero archetype I didn't mention, it's not only that it's kind of Rambo with the weapons. The other kind of hero archetype, and you get this a lot in Greek myth, is a guy, an alpha male on a quest to do something entirely for himself. Right? Like I don't care that you went off on a boat for 10 years and conquered some islands. Like, right. How about you conquered famine That would bring me back that news. That's worth being away from home for 10 years. So perhaps reflect on the hero story and where you might already fit. That's already brave in this culture to say, I want to protect other people and don't want to do any harm. And two more pieces. A sort of a philosophical friend of mine has this wonderful answer whenever somebody says to him, well, I hear what you're saying, but where do you draw the line? The answer is somewhere. Okay. You draw the line somewhere, and it's up to you to discern, along with your spiritual wisdom partners, the people you trust, where to draw the line in terms of what you're called to and the action you're going to take in the world, the resources that you have, your own sense of yourself. And this can include things like where you live or what you do for a living. And you might be able to do certain things when you live here and not other things. And you might be able to do other things when you live here. And so this notion that we're supposed to do everything, or we obviously can't do everything, or we're supposed to feel guilty about all the bits of the everything that we can't do, that's really selfish, actually. Because if it's my job to do everything, what kind of meaningful life are you going to have?
Right.
I don't want to steal the thunder of Mickey's vocation. Like, what I want to do, and you've heard me say this before, in an earlier book, The Seventh Story, we talk about I'm not the protagonist and humans are not the protagonist of the story. Experiment with the idea that the protagonist of the story we're in is love itself. Love, the willingness to extend yourself for the sake of another. And this is it's like a play or a big Broadway show. And there are 7 billion members in the cast right now. And every single member of the cast has one big show-stopping number, and that's your life. And when you're doing your show-stopping number, the rest of us are supposed to be standing behind you with jazz hands kind of reflecting light onto you. Go, girl, do your thing. Do your thing. Well, oh, you dropped something. We'll come pick it up and help you with that. Oh, you're carrying too much. Let me take some of that. And then there'll come a time when it's my job to stand out there. But whoever's out there in the spotlight, their job is actually to be reflecting upwards and outwards to love. So that what people see when they look at them is not, oh, I want to be like Gareth, or I want to be Gareth. Or as Stephen King says, when somebody asks him at a reading, how do I become a writer? He will say, do you mean, how do I become a famous rich person who does book launch events? Or do you mean, how do I become a writer? Because they're two very different things. And know that you're not going to write the same kinds of books that I write. I want you to write your book. I want you to write your book. So bravery doesn't happen. Like, there's tasks we can only do on our own, but we learn the path in community. And part of community's job is to tell us to stop. Part of community's job is to tell us, draw the line here. No, it's okay. Slow down, take a break. You can't do that while you're there. If it's okay. Yeah. We've got you. Like earlier when Vince spoke up and said, I've got your back, the fear started to dissipate for me, and I didn't need to be brave anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it brings us back to our own hearts, and back to that love that you're talking about as the protagonist. With bravery and courage, I think really being about, being in touch with our own hearts. So thank you for being in touch with yours and writing this book that we can all share in. There is a question about whether this will be an audiobook.
Yes.
We're going to transition. It will
be.
For sure. You're already working on that. Should be available when, do you know?
And I could predict maybe midsummer, not sure. So no excuse not to buy the actual hard copy of the book first.
Okay, buy the hard copy
and then
first.
burn that copy. See how the energy gets released, and buy another copy.
And then and the audiobook. So, but we are transitioning now into another song by our friend David LaMotte as we wrap up our time together. Gareth, any final words as we do that?
Yes, someone's asking, has this been recorded? It has, and the recording will be made available with some judicious edits. And also, yes, it will be me reading the audiobook. And I meant to recommend Wonder Woman 1984, which is the first comic book hero story that truly addresses a psychologically credible motivation to a villain and is honest about the burden of being a hero and allows the hero to literally save the world without killing anybody.
Perfect.
Thank you, Mickey.
Ready for you, David.
What a gift this time has been. Thank you all so much for being here and forming the circle to help Gareth push this book out into the world. Thanks, Mickey, for being such an amazing doula. It's what you do, and you do it so well. I'm grateful for you and the light you shine. I'm going to play this other song that Gareth asked me to play today that's, well, I won't say too much about it. We've had a lot of good words today. I'll just sing you a song. It's called Just One Candle. Okay, I gotta say one thing. Because it's important, you know, there's a bunch of writers on the call. We gotta give credit where it's due, and I should clarify that I co-wrote this song. I wrote the verses, and Francis of Assisi wrote the chorus. He was great to work with. The closest I've flown to the face of a war was into Sarajevo on the wing and a prayer. And the bombs didn't fly from the hills anymore, but the people were haunted. There was fear in the air, and the city was cratered from the shells and the rounds, like rain on a puddle, like the face of the moon. And they buried the bodies till they filled up the ground. In the grass on the highway, they just ran out of room. But the people have gathered in the middle of town with the songs they hold sacred of a time coming soon. From their different traditions, they are singing the sound of their future together, and they're singing in tune. And all the darkness in the world can't extinguish the light of just one candle. All the darkness in the world can't extinguish the light of just one candle. I got word overseas that an old friend had died. She was bright-eyed and laughing and gone far too young. And my spirit and body felt hollow inside, and I wanted to cry out, but no sound would come. So I walked through the night in a dangerous town where the gunfire can sound like the 4th of July. But by chance I looked up, and the stars shining down tore the wind from my lungs and the rain from my eyes. Because just like my friend, those stars are long gone, and that light has been shining for thousands of years. So the light that we shine seems to go on and on, like those rays across the cosmos to refract through my tears. And all the darkness in the world can't extinguish the light of just one candle. You can say love is a that the real world is heartless and that hope is for fools. But I watch for the sunrise, and the truth is I've found it's not light that is fragile, it's the other way round. No, the darkness in the world can't extinguish the light with just one candle. Oh, the darkness in the world can't extinguish the light with just one candle. Believe me that all the darkness in the world can't extinguish the light with just one candle.
Thank you, Dave. I believe that song. One more thing from me, and then we'll hand back to Trent and Francie to close us out. There's an amazing Irish writer and really a shaman called John Moriarty, who is not with us on this plane anymore, but his words are and his spirit is too. And he tells this amazing story about being at home one night and looking out the window and seeing one of those transcendently full moons reflecting on the ocean. Stunning, you know, a moon almost as bright as daylight. And then he switched on the electric light in his room and the moon disappeared. And he uses this to illustrate that there are certain things you can only see in the dark. And that there is a paradox that sometimes when we switch on lights artificially, we stop being able to see the deeper light. And so he switched the light off and sat in his chair and watched the moon. And that's relevant to this closing blessing from the book, which is called A Blessing for Seeing in the Dark. No one can know your darkness like you can. And even you will not know it unless you face it. Strange, I know, to imagine facing something you cannot see. But there are things that can only be found in the dark. There is light that can only be seen in the dark. There may even be fragments or dimensions of love that will only touch you if you let them visit you in the dark. You are here not just to save the world, but to be changed. So may nighttime bring you in touch with memory, an examine of the day with gratitude and learning, of the year, of your life and the 7 generations that brought you here, and with possibility of the year, of your life and the 7 generations to come. May you wake from your dreams laughing and carry innocence becoming wonder wherever you go. May you tread lightly on the earth. Know that she belongs to you, and in her is your belonging too. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, everybody who tuned in. And thank you to our special guests, Kathleen, to Mickey, to Dave. This has been an amazing, Gareth, we've heard your message, we've read your book, and I really was touched in a new and different way today by all this conversation. So thank you to all of you. And special thanks to Jen Casper, who's Village Well Books and Coffee. We're our special hosts. You can see Jen with the mask in the middle with the book. And Dave has been like a good participant, posting the link over and over to get the book from Village Well. You'll get signed copies if you do it there. And obviously, if you can't, if it's more convenient to go to your local independent bookstore, we're supportive of that too. So thank you, Gareth. Thank you all from our hearts to yours. And hopefully we'll see you all very soon.
Love to all.